You've watched videos about Imperial ranks, maybe 2 or 3 of them, and you're still confused. Good. That means you were paying attention. Because here's what those videos didn't tell you. The confusion isn't a gap in your knowledge. It's a 40-year failure of world building that Lucasfilm has never bothered to fix. 3 different officers can wear identical rank plaques. The same title means different things depending on which book you read. And somehow, every single video about Imperial hierarchy skips the position that's literally second to the Emperor himself. So let's fix that. Not by pretending the system makes sense, by showing you exactly where it breaks. And we're going to start with the man standing right next to Palpatine when the Empire was born. The one you've seen in the background of every prequel scene in the Senate. The one whose name you probably don't know. Mas Amedda, Grand Vizier of the Galactic Empire. The second most powerful political position in a million-world government. And most Imperial rank videos don't even mention him. First, let's establish why you're confused in the first place. Because it goes back further than you think. When costume designer John Molo created those gray-green Imperial officer uniforms in 1976 and 1977, he wasn't building a system. He was solving a visual problem. George Lucas needed his villains to look authoritarian, fascist aesthetics without direct Nazi replication. Molo designed tunics with high collars, jackboots, and those little rectangular plaques covered in colored squares. Those plaques meant nothing. Meant something we haven't decoded yet. Meant nothing. They were decorative, designed to photograph well under the harsh lighting of Death Star corridors. No production document from the original trilogy establishes what any configuration of colored tiles actually signified. Look at Tarkin's plaque in the original 1977 film. 6 blue squares over 3 blue squares and 3 yellow squares. That configuration communicated senior officer through its size and complexity. But it didn't correspond to any defined system because no system existed. The costume department designed what looked impressive on camera. That was the entire methodology. When Admiral Ozzel got force-choked and Captain Piet became Admiral Piet, both men wore whatever the costume department considered admiral-looking that day. The visual grammar remained consistent. More squares and more complexity meant higher rank, but the specific relationships between titles and insignia were never codified by anyone at Lucasfilm. Different scenes in the same film sometimes showed the same character with slightly different plaque configurations, because continuity checking rank insignia wasn't a priority when you're trying to get the shot before the practical effects melt. So when you stare at a rank plaque chart, trying to figure out why Admiral Piet and Captain Nita seem to have the same insignia in different scenes, that's not your failure. That's the failure of a system that was never a system to begin with. The original trilogy also established something that would haunt all future attempts at systematization: the fundamental ambiguity between military and political authority. Grand Moff Tarkin commanded military forces aboard the Death Star, but Moff was described as a regional governorship, a political position. The Emperor appeared only as a hologram in Empire Strikes Back. His relationship to Tarkin and the military command structure left entirely undefined. Darth Vader occupied an even stranger position. He gave orders to Imperial officers, yet he held no visible rank insignia and no official title within the military hierarchy. The Empire felt coherent. It looked coherent. But nobody had actually defined how that coherence functioned. But here's where it gets messy. In 1987, West End Games acquired the license to make a Star Wars tabletop role-playing game. And role-playing games need rules. Players need to know if their character outranks an NPC, what authority different titles convey, how power structures actually function. So West End Games did something Lucasfilm never bothered to do. They invented a complete Imperial hierarchy from scratch. The Imperial sourcebook, published October 1989 under product code WEG 40006, became the Bible of Imperial world-building. This wasn't some flimsy pamphlet. 144 pages of dense material establishing an entire logical framework for the colored tiles that John Molo had designed as decoration. According to the sourcebook, blue tiles indicated Imperial Navy service. Red tiles indicated Imperial Army service. Yellow tiles indicated specialized branches like intelligence or the Imperial Security Bureau. The number and arrangement of tiles corresponded to specific ranks. Elaborate charts mapped precise configurations to titles from ensign all the way up through Grand Admiral. A 6x3 configuration with specific color ratios meant one thing. A 4x2 configuration meant another. West End Games reverse-engineered meaning from meaninglessness, creating order where Lucas had created only aesthetics. The book also established the political structure of the Empire. Regional governors administering sectors, Moffs controlling multiple sectors, Grand Moffs commanding vast oversectors, and at the apex of civilian government, something called the Imperial Ruling Council, a collective body of bureaucrats composed of senior advisors, department heads, and political elites who managed the day-to-day operations of running a million worlds, while Palpatine focused on military campaigns, Sith schemes, and consolidating his power through fear. And here's the kicker. The sourcebook also established who held the position of Grand Vizier, a man named Satay Pestage. According to West End Games, Pestage was a pale, gaunt human who had served Palpatine since his days as a senator from Naboo. Not just an advisor, a co-conspirator from the beginning. The Emperor's chief administrative deputy, the man who handled day-to-day governance of the entire galactic empire while Palpatine focused on grander designs. This characterization appeared again in the second edition Imperial sourcebook, published January 1995 under product code WEG 40092. The expanded universe novels built on it extensively. Pestage appeared in comics, referenced in novels, established as a known quantity in the post-Return of the Jedi power vacuum. When Palpatine died at Endor, Pestage attempted to seize control of the fragmenting empire. He ruled as regent for several months before being overthrown by rival factions within the imperial court. His fate varied depending on which source you consulted. Some depicted him fleeing Coruscant, others showed him being assassinated by political enemies. But the broad strokes remained consistent across 15 years of licensed material. Sate Pestage was the Grand Vizier, pale, gaunt, human, had been with Palpatine since the beginning. The Thrawn trilogy, starting with Heir to the Empire in 1991, cemented this framework as gospel. Author Timothy Zahn consulted the Imperial sourcebook while writing, and his depiction of Imperial military structure, with Grand Admirals as the highest naval rank, Moffs as sector governors, and a post-Endor power vacuum filled by competing warlords, built directly on what West End Games had created. For an entire generation of fans, this was Star Wars. The rank plaque system had been decoded. The political hierarchy had been mapped. Sate Pestage stood at the apex of civilian government. By the late 1990s, if you asked any serious Star Wars fan who the Grand Vizier was, they'd give you the same answer: Pestage. Then George Lucas made the prequels, and he didn't ask West End Games for permission. The Phantom Menace premiered May 19, 1999. And there, standing beside Chancellor Valorum's podium, was a new character. Blue-skinned, distinctive horns curving backward from his skull. Vice Chair of the Galactic Senate, Mas Amedda. No West End Games sourcebook had established a Vice Chair. No expanded universe novel had created this character. Lucas designed him from scratch, positioning him at the highest levels of Republic government, participating in the pivotal vote of no confidence that elevated Palpatine to Supreme Chancellor. The character's design was deliberately intimidating. Chagrians are an amphibious species from the planet Shambhala, and Amidda's towering frame, blue skin, and Lethorn horns made him visually striking in Senate scenes. He wasn't just background decoration. He wielded the ceremonial staff of office. He called for order during debates. He stood at Palpatine's shoulder during the most significant political moments in galactic history. Attack of the Clones in 2002 showed Amedda continuing in this role. When the Separatist crisis threatened to tear the Republic apart, Amedda was there, calling for emergency powers to be granted to the Chancellor. When Jar Jar Binks made his infamous motion to give Palpatine authority to create a grand army of the Republic, Amedda presided over the vote. He didn't just witness the moment that enabled Palpatine's rise to absolute power, he facilitated it. The Clone Wars animated series, which ran from 2008 to 2014, expanded Amedda's role considerably. Across 6 seasons of the show, he appeared in numerous episodes, always at Palpatine's side, always facilitating the Chancellor's accumulation of power. The series depicted him in private meetings with Palpatine, whispering counsel while Jedi stood in the same room, completely unaware of the conspiracy unfolding around them. Was Amedda a willing collaborator or a useful fool? The material is deliberately ambiguous. Some episodes suggest he understood exactly what Palpatine was doing, that he was complicit in the Sith Lord's manipulation of the Republic. Others portray him as a political creature focused entirely on his own status, blind to the larger game being played. He served Palpatine loyally because serving Palpatine meant power and proximity, regardless of the larger implications. What's clear is that he was essential to Palpatine's rise, not as a Sith apprentice, but as an administrative enabler. The bureaucratic machinery of the Republic required someone to manage it. Senate procedures needed someone to enforce them. Political opponents needed someone to outmaneuver them through parliamentary tactics. Amedda filled that role throughout the Clone Wars, while the Jedi were distracted by a manufactured galactic conflict. Every time Palpatine needed a voice vote called, Amedda was there. Every time debate needed to be curtailed, Amedda wielded the gavel. Every time emergency powers needed to be extended for another emergency that Palpatine himself had orchestrated, Amedda ensured the motion passed. Then came Revenge of the Sith. May 19, 2005. When Palpatine declared the formation of the Galactic Empire before the cheering Senate, Mas Amedda stood at his right hand. The visual language was unmistakable. This towering Chagrian in elaborate robes was Palpatine's chief political deputy, the man who would administer the Empire's civilian government. Subsequent reference materials made it official. Mas Amedda held the title of Grand Vizier, which was a problem, because according to 15 years of expanded universe material, Sate Pestage held that title. 2 different characters, different species, one a pale, gaunt human, the other a towering, blue-skinned Chagrian with horns. Different appearances, different backstories, same position. George Lucas had created a Grand Vizier who was not the Grand Vizier. The expanded universe tried to paper over this contradiction, desperately. Some sources suggested both served as Grand Vizier at different times, Pestage during the original trilogy era, Amedda during the prequel era. But this made no sense chronologically, since Amedda was clearly still at Palpatine's side during the Empire's formation, which meant he should have been Grand Vizier when the original trilogy events occurred. Others implied both held the title simultaneously, with different responsibilities. Amedda as the ceremonial figurehead handling Senate relations and public appearances, Pestage as the operational administrator managing the bureaucratic machinery of Imperial governance behind the scenes. This was creative, but it strained credulity. How many Grand Viziers does one empire need? Some creative fans theorized that Grand Vizier might be a title held by multiple officials, like cabinet positions in a modern government. Perhaps the empire had several Grand Viziers overseeing different domains, a Grand Vizier of the Interior, a Grand Vizier of External Affairs. Possible, but completely unsupported by any official material. None of these explanations were satisfying, because the fundamental contradiction remained. The man Lucas showed standing beside Palpatine at the Empire's founding was not the man that novels and sourcebooks had spent 15 years describing as the Emperor's chief administrator. Imagine you're a fan in 2005. You've read the Thrawn trilogy. You've played the West End Games campaigns. You know that Sate Pestage was the Grand Vizier, that he ruled briefly as regent after Endor, that his power struggles with the Imperial ruling council defined the early post-Endor era. And now you're watching Revenge of the Sith, and there's this blue alien standing next to Palpatine, and the reference materials are telling you he's the Grand Vizier. What happened to Pestage? Nothing. Pestage still existed in those same novels you'd already read. But now there was also Amedda. Both were Grand Vizier. Neither acknowledged the other. The continuity simply contradicted itself. This is what I mean when I say the confusion isn't your fault. Lucasfilm created it. 15 years of licensed material built a coherent political structure. Then the creator of the franchise ignored all of it and made something incompatible. Both versions claimed to be authoritative Star Wars. Neither acknowledged the other's existence. To understand why the title Grand Vizier matters, it helps to know where it comes from. In the real-world Ottoman Empire, the Grand Vizier was the chief minister to the Sultan, effectively the head of government while the Sultan served as head of state. The Grand Vizier held the imperial seal and could act in the Sultan's name on administrative matters. During the reign of Mehmed II in the 15th century, the position became the most powerful office in the empire below the Sultan himself. Star Wars borrowed the term deliberately. The Grand Vizier was meant to be Palpatine's chief administrator, the man who ran the Empire's civilian government while the Emperor focused on military campaigns, Sith machinations, and whatever schemes occupied a Dark Lord's attention. In both legends and canon, the position carried enormous theoretical authority. The Grand Vizier spoke with the Emperor's voice on political matters. But here's the catch. Theoretical authority means nothing in an autocracy run on personal loyalty. Palpatine didn't delegate because he trusted his subordinates. He delegated because even a Sith Lord can't personally oversee 1 million star systems. The Grand Vizier handled paperwork, managed bureaucratic disputes, and kept the machinery of government running. But the moment any decision actually mattered, Palpatine made it himself. This is why questions about whether Mas Amedda had real power miss the point. In the Empire structure, nobody had real power except Palpatine. Everyone else had delegated authority that could be revoked at any moment. Amedda's importance wasn't that he could overrule Tarkin or command the military. His importance was access, proximity to the Emperor, the ability to shape what information reached Palpatine's attention. And when that access disappeared, when Palpatine died above Endor, Amedda's authority evaporated instantly. Now let's talk about what actually happens when you're second to the Emperor and the Emperor dies. Because this is where legends and canon diverge so dramatically that they might as well be different franchises. In Legends, the post-Endor era was extensively documented across dozens of novels, comics, and sourcebooks. The power vacuum left by Palpatine's death created immediate chaos. The Imperial ruling council, that collective body of bureaucrats West End Games had established, attempted to govern collectively, but its members lacked Palpatine's personal authority to enforce compliance. Military commanders with fleets at their disposal saw no reason to take orders from bureaucrats on Coruscant. Sate Pestage, the legend's Grand Vizier, attempted to seize control in the immediate aftermath. He ruled as regent for several months, claiming to speak with the Emperor's authority, trying to hold the fragmenting government together through administrative channels and political maneuvering. But he was a bureaucrat in a collapsing empire, where military force had become the only currency that mattered. He was overthrown by rival factions within the imperial court. Director of Imperial Intelligence Isan Isard emerged as a major power player, eventually taking control of Coruscant itself. The Imperial ruling council fragmented into competing factions. Pestage fled Coruscant and was eventually assassinated by political enemies. The precise circumstances varied depending on which source you consulted, but the broad trajectory was clear. The pale, gaunt human who had served Palpatine since Naboo died unmourned in the chaos following his master's destruction. Grand Admiral Thrawn, who had been operating in the unknown regions, returned to reunite Imperial forces 5 years after Endor. Grand Moff Artus Cain carved out his own pentastar alignment in the Outer Rim. Warlord Zinj assembled a personal fiefdom spanning multiple sectors. The Empire didn't fall. It shattered into competing successor states, each claiming to represent legitimate imperial authority. And then, 6 years after Endor, Palpatine returned. The Dark Empire comics, published by Dark Horse beginning in 1991, revealed that Palpatine had been transferring his consciousness into clone bodies maintained at a secret facility on the deep core world Biss. The Clone Emperor storyline showed him reconquering much of the galaxy, before being permanently destroyed through the combined efforts of Luke Skywalker and the Force ghosts of deceased Jedi. In Legends, Palpatine planned for immortality, clone bodies, consciousness transfer, eternal rule. The post-Endor chaos resulted from the unexpected destruction of his current body before he could complete a transfer, a temporary setback, not a true death. In canon, Palpatine never intended for any of that. The Walt Disney Company acquired Lucasfilm in October 2012 for $4.05 billion. On April 25, 2014, Lucasfilm announced that the expanded universe would be rebranded as Legends and considered non-canonical. Only the films and the Clone Wars animated series would form the foundation of official continuity. Sate Pestage ceased to exist. Every novel describing him as Grand Vizier became elaborate fan fiction. 25 years of Imperial succession storylines were erased. The Dark Empire clone saga? Never happened. Thrawn's original campaign? Rewritten entirely for the Rebels animated series with completely different circumstances. And what replaced them was darker. The Aftermath trilogy, written by Chuck Wendig between 2015 and 2017, revealed what actually happened to Mas Amedda in the new canonical timeline. The first novel, published September 2015, depicted the immediate post-Endor chaos from multiple perspectives. The second, Life Debt, showed the New Republic's campaign to liberate occupied worlds. The third volume, Aftermath, Empire's End, published February 2017, contains a detail that most Imperial rank videos won't tell you. The Grand Vizier of the Galactic Empire attempted suicide. After Endor, Mas Amedda spent a year trapped in the Imperial Palace on Coruscant as the planet descended into civil conflict. The towering Chagrian who had called for order in the Senate, who had wielded the ceremonial staff while Palpatine declared the New Order, who had spent decades facilitating his master's rise, now found himself powerless, isolated, a prisoner in his own seat of government. Rival factions fought for control of the capital. Amedda's theoretical authority meant nothing when he had no forces loyal to him personally. He was Grand Vizier of an empire that no longer recognized his legitimacy. He watched everything collapse around him. He tried to end his life. He was talked down. Not from compassion, from administrative necessity. Someone needed to sign the surrender documents. The Galactic Concordance, which Amedda signed with the New Republic in 5 ABY, approximately 1 year after the Battle of Endor, formally ended the Galactic Civil War. The second most powerful political figure in the Empire became its undertaker. The man who had called for emergency powers, who had presided over the Senate's transformation into an instrument of tyranny, now acknowledged the regime's defeat with his signature. Compare this to Pestage's fate in Legends. Both Grand Viziers, the pale human and the blue Chagrian, fell from the heights of imperial power. But Pestage was assassinated by political rivals in the struggle for succession. Amedda was broken so completely that he tried to kill himself, then was kept alive specifically to formalize defeat. 2 Grand Viziers, 2 completely different endings, neither acknowledging the other ever existed. But here's the detail that really separates canon from Legends. Operation Cinder. Introduced in the Star Wars Battlefront 2 video game, released November 2017, Operation Cinder depicted Palpatine's contingency plan. Automated messenger droids carrying the Emperor's final orders dispersed across the galaxy immediately after his death at Endor. Those orders were explicit. Loyal Imperial worlds were to be devastated by their own military forces. Climate disruption satellites, orbital bombardment, the systematic destruction of populations that had served the Empire faithfully. The contingency, as this plan was called, represented Palpatine's philosophy that an empire which could not protect its emperor did not deserve to exist. Think about that for a second. In Legends, Palpatine planned for immortality, clone bodies, consciousness transfer, eternal rule. In canon, Palpatine planned for annihilation. If he died, everything burned with him. These two conceptions of imperial succession are philosophically irreconcilable. Yet both claim to explain the same fictional events. What happened to the Empire after the second Death Star exploded? If you've ever felt confused about Imperial succession, it's because two entirely different answers exist. And which one is correct depends entirely on whether you consider the pre-2014 expanded universe authoritative. A common question I see in comment sections asks about whether there was an Empress in Legends. The short answer? Not really. Various female characters held power in post-Endor Legends continuity. Yzan Isard, Admiral Dalla, but no one ever bore the title of Empress Consort to Palpatine. The question assumes a succession model that Palpatine, in both continuities, never actually established. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The answer to who would succeed the Emperor is nobody. In Legends, he planned to live forever. In canon, he planned to take everything with him. Neither version of Palpatine established a legitimate succession, because neither version of Palpatine believed succession would ever be necessary. So where does this leave the Imperial ruling council? That depends entirely on which continuity you're asking about. In Legends, the council was extensively documented across dozens of novels and sourcebooks. It functioned as a collective administrative organ handling the bureaucratic complexity of galactic governance. The Imperial sourcebook described it as composed of senior advisors, department heads, and political elites who managed the Empire's civilian affairs. Its membership included Grand Vizier Sate Pestage, Imperial advisor Ars Dangor, and figures like Janus Grijatus, Sim Alu, and Kren Blistavani, names you might recognize if you've ever paused on the Emperor's throne room scenes in Return of the Jedi and wondered who those robed figures were. After Endor, the Legends Council attempted to govern the fragmenting Empire collectively. They formed something called the Central Committee of Grand Moffs to coordinate military response to the rebellion. But bureaucrats giving orders to military commanders who controlled actual fleets was never going to work. Grand Admiral Thrawn, Grand Moff Artus Kane, Warlord Zinj, the men with ships didn't take orders from men with titles. In canon, the Imperial ruling council exists. Reference materials acknowledge it, but its composition and activities remain largely undefined. The post-Endor canon timeline shows the council becoming irrelevant almost immediately after Palpatine's death, because the contingency ensured no successor government could effectively form. When your Emperor's final orders involve destroying your own worlds, the legitimacy of any institution claiming to continue his government collapses. So if you're researching the Imperial ruling council, you'll find detailed answers from legend sources and fragmentary mentions from canon sources. The council is simultaneously a major political institution and a barely mentioned administrative body. Both answers are correct. Neither is complete. Here's where we need to address the Grand Moff problem. Because Wilhuff Tarkin illustrates the ambiguity that has never been resolved across any era of Star Wars production. Grand Moff. Is it a military rank or a political position? Yes. The West End Games Imperial Sourcebook described Grand Moffs as regional governors with supreme authority over oversectors, vast territories encompassing multiple standard Imperial sectors. This made the position simultaneously political, governing civilian populations, setting economic policy, and military, commanding all Imperial forces within the oversector. The fusion was intentional within the fiction, representing Palpatine's consolidation of power. When the Imperial Senate was dissolved, the Grand Moffs became the primary instrument of regional control. Tarkin wasn't the only Grand Moff. In Legends, the title was held by multiple officials governing different oversectors. Grand Moff Artus Kane controlled the new territories in the Outer Rim and survived the Battle of Endor to establish his own pentastar alignment, a successor state that lasted for years. Grand Moff Rufan Tigalinus oversaw another oversector and served on the Central Committee of Grand Moffs during the post-Endor crisis. Grand Moff Bertroff Hissa appeared in the young adult Jedi Prince novels as a cyborg loyalist still fighting for the Empire years after Endor. Each of these Grand Moffs wielded extraordinary authority within their territories. They could mobilize military forces, impose martial law, and execute policy without consulting Coruscant. But that authority derived entirely from Palpatine's personal decree. When the Emperor died, their legitimacy became a matter of how many Star Destroyers they personally controlled. Canon materials describe Tarkin as provincial administrator of the regions of space along the galactic frontier, confirming the political dimension of his authority. Yet he commanded the Death Star, directed military operations against the Rebel Alliance, gave orders to Imperial Navy officers who technically held independent military commissions. The 2014 novel Tarkin by James Luceno established his authority as deriving directly from Palpatine's personal favor, rather than any formal position in either the military or political hierarchy. Tarkin had been one of Palpatine's earliest supporters during his rise to power. He had proposed the doctrine of rule through fear, the Tarkin doctrine, that became Imperial military philosophy. His Grand Moff status wasn't a rank he'd earned through promotion. It was a unique position created specifically for him. So did Grand Vizier Mas Amedda outrank Grand Moff Tarkin. In ceremonial terms and proximity to the Emperor, absolutely. Amedda held the superior position in the formal hierarchy of the Imperial government. At state functions, Amedda would have precedence. In the Imperial Palace, Amedda's authority was unquestioned. In terms of military command authority, Tarkin answered to no one except Palpatine himself. Amedda couldn't have ordered Tarkin to do anything. They operated in parallel structures that intersected only at the Emperor's person. This is why real-world military analogies only partially apply to the Empire. In actual militaries, inter-service rank equivalencies exist precisely to resolve these questions. A naval captain equals an army colonel. Both are 06 in the U.S. system. A brigadier general equals a rear admiral lower half. These equivalencies allow personnel from different branches to understand who outranks whom when they interact. The Empire didn't have clean branch separation. It had overlapping spheres of authority that only made sense when a single autocrat sat at the center, resolving conflicts through personal decree. Military commanders, political governors, intelligence directors, and administrative officials all reported to Palpatine through different channels. When those channels conflicted, Palpatine decided. Remove Palpatine, and the entire system collapses. Not because of military defeat, because the organizational structure was never designed to function without him. Let me show you how this plays out in visual terms. Because the rank plaque problem never went away, it just got more complicated. The rank plaque system that West End Games codified in 1989 has been contradicted by every major Star Wars production since. Rogue One, released December 2016, depicted director Orson Krennic wearing a white uniform with a rank plaque configuration corresponding to no established system. The accompanying reference book, Rogue One, The Ultimate Visual Guide, provided detailed explanations of Imperial ranks and their insignia, explanations that would be ignored almost immediately. The Mandalorian, premiering on Disney Plus in November 2019, introduced Moff Gideon as the primary antagonist. His rank plaque matched neither the West End Games system nor the Rogue One visual guide. It matched whatever the costume department thought looked authoritative that day. When Gideon returned in subsequent seasons, his insignia remained inconsistent with any published system. Andor, the 2022 Disney Plus series, praised for its grounded approach to Star Wars, featured Imperial officers wearing rank plaques that varied between episodes. The Imperial Security Bureau officers displayed configurations that didn't correspond to the careful charts West End Games had created 33 years earlier. The show's costume designers created what looked correct for each scene without reference to 40 years of accumulated systematization. This is exactly what John Molo did in 1977. Design for visual impact. Worry about consistency? Never. 4 decades of systematization by licensees, reference book authors, and wiki editors have had zero lasting impact on how Lucasfilm actually produces Star Wars content. Each new production creates whatever rank insignia serves its immediate needs. The correct meaning of a rank plaque depends entirely on which source you consult, and those sources were created by different teams working from different assumptions, often decades apart. So what have we actually learned here? not a clean hierarchy, not a system that makes sense if you just study hard enough. We've learned that the Imperial rank confusion frustrating you is not a failure of your attention or research. It's a production history problem masquerading as a lore problem. Mas Amedda, the blue-skinned Chagrian who stood beside Palpatine from the fall of the Republic to the fall of the Empire, represents everything broken about this system. He's the Grand Vizier because George Lucas put him there in 1999. But he wasn't the Grand Vizier according to 15 years of prior material that called Sate Pestage by that title. His canon fate involves suicide attempts and signing surrender documents in the ruins of a collapsed regime. His legend's fate is essentially undefined because Lucas created him too late for that continuity to integrate him properly. He's the second most important political figure in Imperial history. He appeared in 3 prequel films, the Clone Wars animated series, and numerous canon novels. And most videos about Imperial ranks don't mention him at all. Because he doesn't fit neatly into the military hierarchy charts that those videos prefer to explain. Because his existence highlights contradictions that clean explainer videos would rather ignore. Because covering Mas Amedda means admitting that the system doesn't make sense, and that's not what most viewers want to hear. But you're not here for comfortable lies. You're here because you noticed something didn't add up, and now you know why. The inconsistency is the answer. Lucasfilm has never prioritized world-building consistency over individual production needs. John Molo designed costumes in 1977 that looked military without meaning anything specific. West End Games systematized those costumes in 1989 to serve their game mechanics. George Lucas ignored that systematization in 1999 and created characters occupying positions West End Games had already filled. Disney erased the West End Games continuity in 2014 and established new canonical facts. Subsequent productions have continued ignoring all prior systematization, designing whatever serves their immediate visual and narrative requirements. The result is 40 years of accumulated contradictions that no amount of fan analysis can reconcile. Because the contradictions aren't errors to be corrected, they're the inevitable result of a franchise that never treated internal consistency as a priority. You're not confused because you missed something. You're confused because the source material is genuinely contradictory. Different writers, different eras, different corporate ownership, different canonical status, all claiming to describe the same fictional government, all getting it wrong in different ways. The next time someone acts like Imperial ranks have a clear logic you just need to study, remember Mas Amedda. Remember that George Lucas created a Grand Vizier without asking whether a Grand Vizier already existed. Remember that Disney erased one version of history and replaced it with another that contradicts everything fans spent 25 years learning? Remember that the rank plaques on Imperial uniforms started as purely decorative elements in 1977 and have been retrofitted with meaning by people who weren't involved in their creation. The confusion isn't your fault. It's Lucasfilm's. And now you understand something most viewers, and honestly, some Star Wars writers, never fully grasp. The inconsistency is the point. Subscribe for more stories like this.